It's 4 a.m., and Dr. Luc Ladmiral is being summoned to the home of his best friend since medical school, Jean-Claude Romand. He arrives to find Romand's home burned down, and tragically, the bodies of his wife and children being carried out of the home, his children in body bags, and his wife's charred body covered by a coat. His friend is being carried out also, unconscious, but alive. Luc actually prays that his friend doesn't regain consciousness, knowing that he would not be able to bear living without the family that he cherished more than life itself. As his friend is carried to an ambulance, in a final farewell gesture to his friend's wife, Luc, a physician, strokes her hair, but immediately notices something odd. He probes further and finds an open wound at the base of the skull, which the fireman he beckons over assumes is the result of a beam that must have fallen on her when part of the attic collapsed. Still in a daze from what was assumed to be a tragic boiler accident, Luc eventually heads to work later that morning only to find the police at his office asking him bizarre questions, like whether the Romands had any enemies who may want to harm them. Seeing Luc's shock, the police divulged the truth that the Romands were murdered, the 2 children shot, and the wife beaten. And all too soon, he would learn that his best friend, his medical school buddy, the one who married and had kids at the same time as him, the one who held a prestigious position as a renowned world-traveling research scientist with the WHO, didn't actually work at the WHO at all. And he wasn't even a doctor. Luc's head spins as he tries to comprehend the enormity and strangeness of what he's hearing. Who is this person they're referring to? Welcome back to Crime Ages Z, where we detail cases and criminals from their very beginning until well after other reporting ends. Today we'll be talking about a case that is so bizarre and extreme, it literally seems like fiction. We were intrigued by this case when we first learned about it, but had no idea it would take so many shocking turns, nor how low one person can sink in their level of inhumanity. But now, we know. Join us as we uncover how one man's hard-to-believe 18-year charade of pretending to be a doctor is only the tip of this roller coaster of a case. Jean-Claude Romand was born in Lons-le-Saunier, France on February 11, 1954, to parents Anne-Marie and Aimé Romand. Jean-Claude's father, Aimé, was a prisoner of war for 5 years during World War II of German Stalag, before he returned home to run his father's timber company. He would marry Anne-Marie shortly thereafter. Aimé was a stubborn, emotionless man, and Anne-Marie, a homemaker, was a sickly woman. Jean-Claude's childhood classmates, teachers, and neighbors described the younger Romand as being mild-mannered, well-behaved, and eager to please, someone who never got in trouble. Romand grew up in the village of Clairvaux-les-Lacs, a commune in France. He looked up to his father, so throughout his childhood, he planned to go into the forestry business like him once he grew up. But during his secondary school years, Romand attended a boarding school, where most of his classmates' parents were doctors and lawyers, and they looked down on professions such as forest workers. This was likely when Romand first began considering changing his aspirations to becoming a doctor. Throughout his childhood, Romand's parents strictly impressed upon him the importance of telling the truth. But he was also taught the importance of not saying things that would upset other people. This latter instruction would heavily influence his way of thinking. During an interview later in life, Romand would state, "When you're caught in that endless effort not to disappoint people, the first lie leads to another, and then it's your whole life." And that's how it began. Once Romand completed his baccalaureate program in 1971, he began preparatory classes for the forestry industry, not yet telling his parents about his intention to switch to becoming a doctor. But then, while away for his preparatory classes, a bullying incident occurred. Romand developed a series of sinus infections as a result and was allegedly forced to move back home, where he would continue forestry correspondence courses from there. While Romand loved the idea of going into forestry and loathed the idea of touching sick patients, he still had no intention by that time of going into forestry, having already made up his mind to switch to pursuing medicine. He said switching to medicine was a last resort to get him the life he wanted. Jean-Claude dropped out after one term of the forestry instruction, then enrolled as a medical student. Also attending the medical school was a distant cousin of Romand's, Florence Crowlett. It's unclear whether Florence's attendance played a role in Romand's decision to attend the school, but he acknowledged that he considered himself engaged to Florence as early as age 14. Florence had no interest in Romand, but by the end of their first year in med school, he had infiltrated her friend group and convinced Florence to date him. But once they dated and he confessed his love to her, she broke it off, claiming that she needed to focus on her exams and was too busy. Romand fell into a deep depression, but kept it all to himself. And when it came time for his exam, he spent the day lying in bed instead. He rescheduled the exam, but missed the retake as well. Then, when his parents called to ask how his exam went, he told them that it went well. He would go on to tell others the same lie. And later, when his good friend, Luc Ladmiral, showed up at his room laying into him for missing his exam, Romand panicked, knowing he couldn't tell him the truth. And he was even more terrified about having to explain that he lied about passing the exam to others. So he told his friend that he had cancer. Specifically lymphoma, which is a form of cancer that attacks the lymphatic system. He chose that diagnosis since it's one that doesn't have any outward symptoms, so he could lie about it most easily. He'd actually been entertaining the idea of telling people he had cancer for quite some time, since it would explain away both his disappearance as well as his depression. And so he returned to school under the false pretense of having cancer, now juggling both the cancer lie and the exam-passing lie. Ultimately, he would tell everyone that his cancer was in remission, removing one of the lies he'd have to juggle. And when it was time to take the exam for entrance into his third year of medical school, he wasn't allowed since he had not successfully completed his second year. But the school's computer system at the time didn't have a way of preventing someone who didn't complete the second year from re-enrolling for a second year again. So that's what Romand did. And he would do it again and again and again. For 11 years, Romand was lost in the numbers and re-enrolled as a second-year student each year. He was a perpetual second-year medical student for 12 years, all while telling his family and friends that he was normally progressing toward his medical degree. To keep up the facade, Romand would attend lectures for courses that he would have normally taken if he were on track for his degree. He'd buy the required books, take notes, study for the exams, have study sessions with friends, and even show up before and after each exam to make it look as if he was actually present. He essentially did everything except take the actual exams. Then, despite their rough start, Romand and Florence eventually resumed dating. Some claim because Florence took pity on him for having cancer. They went on to marry in 1980. Florence completed her studies with a degree in pharmacology the following year and subsequently worked part-time at a pharmacy. Shortly after that, she and Romand would have 2 children, Caroline in 1985 and Antoine in 1987. In 1986, the university hired a new head who discovered Romand's 12-year span of being a second-year medical student. He placed a hold on Romand's ability to re-enroll, sending him a letter requesting a meeting. By this time, Romand was married and had already had one of his children. Romand didn't show up for the meeting and never re-enrolled again. As far as his wife and the rest of his friends and family knew, Romand had passed the medical board exam in Paris, then became a research assistant at INSERM, the National Institute of Health and Medical Research. Then, not satisfied with his position pretending to be a research assistant, he got promoted, landing a more prestigious fake job as a research scientist at the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. There, he told his family he was involved in inventing new medications for clinical trials. To sell his story, he traveled 30 minutes from their home in Ferney-Voltaire to Geneva regularly, bringing back souvenirs and even gifts for the children from his co-workers. To cover his charade, he had a strict privacy policy that forbade his co-workers from coming to his home and his family from going to his office. He wouldn't even allow his family to know his work phone number. In this pre-cell phone era, his family or friends needed to contact him. They'd have to contact an answering service, leave a message. Then once Romand was paged, he'd call them back. But Romand's daily life was nothing like what he made it out to be. Instead of developing groundbreaking medical treatments, Romand would drop his kids off at school, drive to Geneva, park in the WHO parking lot, and then wander the public areas of the building on a visitor's pass, mostly hanging out in their library or conference room. If he'd happen upon any printed material left in any of the public areas, he'd take them, then later leave them around his home and car to help support his deception. He even used WHO services that were available to the public, like using their travel agency, banking in their bank, and sending mail through their post office. As time passed and Romand had solidly established himself as a WHO employee, he would spend less time there and would, instead, hang out in his car, spend the day at cafes, travel, hike, nap, and visit people. When he was supposed to be away on business trips, he'd simply stay at a hotel near the airport, study the destination he was supposed to be traveling to, then call his family each day as though he was calling from his supposed destination, letting them know what time it was and the current weather there. And when possible, he purchased gifts from the airport gift shop that reflected the country he supposedly visited. Without a job, particularly the well-paying job that he claimed he had, Romand needed a source of income to help him avoid suspicion. Initially, he was able to survive financially off of both the 300,000 francs he'd received by selling the apartment that his parents bought for him while he was a student, as well as regular withdrawals from his parents' bank accounts, which his parents were still allowing him to make despite him supposedly no longer being a student, and despite him having a prestigious job at the WHO. But that funding wouldn't last forever. So, with no salary or income, Romand soon turned to petty crime to bring in the cash that he wasn't earning from his non-existent job. He told people that due to his privileged position at the WHO, he had the ability to invest in high-interest accounts that yielded unprecedented returns. Romand's parents were the first people he swindled, handing over their savings to their son, followed by his uncle. Then, Florence's father, Pierre Crollet, retired and entrusted Romand with 378,000 francs for him to invest on his behalf, which is equivalent to about $150,000 in 2023. Later, Pierre asked Romand to return some of his investment money so he could purchase a Mercedes. A few weeks after his request, while alone at the house with Romand, Pierre fell down the attic stairs and died. There was no proof that Romand had anything to do with Pierre's death, but when Romand called Florence's mom to break the news, he told her that Pierre had had a stroke, which is what caused the fall down the stairs. But the doctors who examined Pierre never mentioned a stroke. As a result of Pierre's death, the money Pierre invested was no longer requested to be returned. But even the large sums of money Romand was swindling from his victims' savings wasn't enough to support the normal bills and expenses that come with supporting the prestigious lifestyle Romand had established. He needed more, and the investment scam could only last so long. So if you thought scamming his parents, his uncle, and his father-in-law out of their savings was as low as a person can go, sit tight. Romand's next big scam involved Florence's uncle, who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Romand told the uncle's wife that he was working on a miracle drug at the WHO that had just been invented, but that wasn't available to the public yet, and likely would not be before the uncle would die. It would either cure or halt the spread of the cancer. He let the wife know he may be able to obtain the drug at the cost of 15,000 francs per pill, 2 of which would be needed for the first dose. The wife took Romand up on his offer, paying him 30,000 francs in exchange for 2 pills, which were placebos. Then after a few months, Romand claimed the uncle would need another dose and collected an additional 30,000 francs from the couple. The uncle died a year later. After Florence's father, Pierre's death from the fall down the stairs, Florence's mother decided to downsize her home. So she sold the home and gave Romand the proceeds to invest, along with the remainder of Pierre's retirement money that he had not yet invested, both totaling 1.3 million francs, or about $500,000 today. Romand used the money to purchase a farmhouse for him and his family. Around that time, he also began having an affair with a woman named Corinne Horton. Corinne was a longtime family friend of the Romands and a divorced mother of 2. Weeks after her divorce was final, Romand sent her flowers and asked her out. Like Florence, Corinne was not originally interested, but Romand eventually won her over, and they dated for a while. Corinne ultimately broke off the relationship, but when she sold her apartment for 900,000 francs, $340,000 today, she handed it over to Romand to invest. which was perfect timing as he was still burning through money nearly as fast as he could swindle it. But this investment didn't go over as easily as the rest. None of his past investors requested any documentation, trusting that Romand was a busy man and they didn't want to bother him with such trivialities, particularly since they trusted him wholeheartedly. But Corinne was concerned that she didn't even get so much as a receipt, an agreement, or otherwise, for her very large investment. She became concerned that if anything ever happened to Romand, she would have no means of tracking down her investment, so she asked for a portion of it back. Romand made up excuses and was able to put her off for a while. Meanwhile, a minor scandal was happening at Romand's kids' school, where the married principal was having an affair with one of the teachers. The school board voted to demote the principal as a result. And for some reason, Romand was the only person to stand up to defend the principal. During all the turmoil, the president of the school board decided to call a meeting with Romand, so he tried to reach him at what he thought was his job at the WHO. He pulled the WHO directory, but didn't find Romand's name. So he checked the International Pension Fund database, but didn't find him there either. He didn't think much of it and dismissed the lack of findings. A few months later, he mentioned it in passing to Florence, who also didn't find it concerning. But she did mention it to Romand later. That finding was the signal to Romand that his lies were about to start closing in on him. Meanwhile, Corinne was growing tired of being put off about her funds being returned. Over dinner one night, she insisted to Romand that he return her money. He told her that he would give her money on January 10, 1993, if she would attend the dinner he was having along with his distinguished friend, Bernard Kouchner, one of the founders of Doctors Without Borders. Corinne agreed. By this point, Romand had swindled his close friends and family out of nearly 3 million francs or 1.2 million US dollars today. With creditors closing in and the threat of exposure looming, 38-year-old Romand made a baffling decision. He devised a plan to get out from underneath it all. He started by going shopping. He withdrew about 2,000 francs from 2 banks, bought some barbiturates, a stun wand, 2 pepper spray canisters, 22 caliber ammunition, a silencer, and some gas cans. He filled the cans with gasoline, then set out to visit his parents. During that visit, authorities believe that Romand obtained his father's shotgun. Then, on the morning of Saturday, January 9th, after Florence got off the phone with her mother, she sat with Romand on the couch. And then, according to Romand, the next thing he remembers is waking up holding a bloody rolling pin, while Florence lay in their bed, having been bludgeoned to death with it. So Romand took the bloody rolling pin to the bathroom, washed it, and put it away. Then he went to bed and slept next to his murdered wife for the night. In the morning, when the children woke up, Romand told them that their mother was still asleep. He then sat down and watched cartoons with them. After about an hour of cartoons, Romand tried to get the kids to drink water containing the barbiturates he'd purchased. But they thought it tasted weird and wouldn't drink it. So he went to plan B, telling the kids they felt warm and maybe getting sick. He first took 7-year-old Caroline upstairs to her bedroom, where he had her turn his back to him. Then he shot and killed her. He then called 5-year-old Antoine upstairs and shot and killed him as well. That left just a few people remaining who were at risk for exposing Romand's lies. So he got dressed and drove to his parents' house. Once there, Romand sat down and enjoyed a meal with them. Then he called his father into his old bedroom to take a look at a broken air vent. Once Amy bent down to get a closer look at the vent, Romand shot him from behind and killed him. He then lured his mother into his sitting room and attempted to get her to look away. But it didn't work, and he ended up shooting her from the front and killing her. Then, because his daughter, Caroline, loved his parents' dog, and Romand claimed he wanted Caroline to have the dog with her, he shot and killed the dog as well. After he was done, he cleaned the rifle and returned it to his father's gun rack, cleaned himself, then called Corinne to confirm their upcoming meeting that he'd strategically scheduled for that day. Then he headed out to her apartment. The two left to the restaurant that they were supposed to be going to, leaving her 2 children with a babysitter. As soon as they got in the car, Corinne asked Romand for her money. Romand claimed he had not had time to go to Geneva to pick it up, but he promised that he would have it for her the following Monday, which was just 2 days away. She was annoyed, but with such a close promised date, she agreed, and they proceeded on their route. On the way there, Romand told Corinne that he needed to pull over to get Bernard Kouchner's phone number out of the trunk. When he returned from the trunk, he told Corinne he couldn't find the number, but found a necklace he wanted to give her instead, and convinced her to get out of the car so he could put it on her. Once she got out of the car, Romand sprayed pepper spray in her face and rammed the stun wand into her stomach. Corinne fought back and begged Romand not to kill her. She fought hard enough that he eventually stopped. He tried to get her to calm down and convince her that she was the one who started attacking him and that he was just defending himself. When she insisted that he was the attacker and that she had not provoked him in the slightest, he claimed that his cancer had come back and that it must have made him go temporarily mad. They decided to not go to dinner, turned around, and dropped Corinne back at her apartment. Corinne recommended to Romand that he seek help and offered to refer him to a therapist. Romand asked her to not tell anyone about what had happened, and she said she wouldn't, so long as she received her money on Monday. Romand left her apartment, but then strangely called her 5 minutes later from a payphone, again asking her to promise to not tell anyone, and making sure she believed that his actions were not premeditated. To prove his point, he told her, "If I'd wanted to kill you, I'd have done it in your apartment, and I'd have killed your girls too." He returned home early Sunday morning, but then worried someone might see his car in the driveway and stop by to say hello. So he drove his car to a nearby store, then walked back home. Then he spent 3 hours taping television shows on a VHS tape. Authorities could not discern what may have been on the tape prior to him taping over it. He then spent the next few hours calling Corinne repeatedly. Her answering machine picked up the first 8 times, but she picked up the phone herself on the 9th call, at which time Romand began apologizing again. Corinne, again, encouraged him to talk to a therapist. He agreed, hung up, and doused the home with gasoline, including directly onto his family's bodies. He changed into his pajamas and set the home on fire, starting in the attic and the children's room, but sparing his and Florence's room where he would shelter. He took steps to make sure that although the fire would consume most of the house, he would be in a room that he would not set on fire and was away from the other fires. He even went so far as to place some clothes near the bottom of the door to prevent smoke from coming into the room he was in. Then, when the fire department arrived, Romand flagged them through the window to come rescue him. Then he fell unconscious. And that's when Romand's best friend, Luc Ladmiral, was awakened shortly after 4 a.m. and told that his good friend's home was on fire and that he should come over at once. The image of his friend's bodies being carried out of the home was being etched into his memory, and the wound he felt on Florence's head, the beginning of a journey that was beyond anything he ever imagined. And while the horror of the fire was unfolding, Romand's uncle was tasked with sharing the devastating news of the fire and deaths of Florence and the kids to Romand's parents. He made the 50-mile or 80-kilometer drive out to their home, only to find them also dead from gunshot wounds, along with the dog, all laying in pools of their own blood. Police were baffled and eager to find out who would want to harm Romand and his family. So the first place they looked was his place of work. Learning that Romand was a scientist at the WHO, they called there to try to find someone who worked with him. They were quickly told that no one by that name worked there. They then checked the National Registry of Physicians. He wasn't listed. They checked the hospitals in Paris, where he claimed to be on their medical staff. He was not accredited at any of them. With just a few phone calls, they had discovered all of this, along with the fact that Romand never even finished medical school. They then discovered Romand's car in the parking lot where he left it, along with a note inside that read, "An ordinary accident. An injustice can bring on madness. Forgive me, Corinne. Forgive me, my friends. Forgive me, good people of the St. Vincent School Board, who wanted to punch my face in." Police wondered what ordinary incident he was referring to. The top choice was the incident at the school board, since that was mentioned in Romand's note. So they interviewed the school board members relentlessly. All were incredulous that such an inane dispute could possibly trigger the massacre of a man's entire family. Police also interviewed Corinne, whom the media referred to as a mysterious mistress, who shared that she and Romand were supposed to meet Bernard Kouchner for dinner that Saturday night. And she described the violent encounter that occurred en route to the restaurant instead. Police contacted Bernard Kouchner, who stated that he'd never heard of Romand. Corinne also shared that she had also given Romand 900,000 francs, which he was supposed to have invested for her in Switzerland. It was quickly discovered that that was a scam, and that Romand had spent the money himself. And she was not the only one. They soon discovered that the investment scam was one of the ways that the unemployed Romand supported himself financially. Meanwhile, Romand resumed what he'd been doing for so many years up until that point and lied. He told police that a man dressed in black had shot the children, then set the house on fire. He claimed he was so paralyzed with fear that he couldn't react and stop the perpetrator. Police interrogated Romand for hours, with Romand attempting to refute each piece of evidence they presented. Even the proof they had that he didn't work at the WHO didn't discourage Romand. He simply stated that he worked as a consultant for a different company. And when they told him that that subsequent company didn't exist, he just moved on to a different story. Then after 7 hours of interrogation, Romand decided it was enough. He confessed to everything. And with that, Luc and his wife Cecile, who had been holding out hope that Romand was somehow entangled in some misunderstanding, were forced to concede that their esteemed, trusted friend was indeed the murderous, deceptive, complete and total fraud that police had been telling them he was. Luc had even, at one point, theorized that perhaps Romand was a part of some spy network where he was involved in peddling scientific or industrial secrets, and that whoever was behind everything had both killed Romand's family, planted evidence to frame Romand, and even wiped out all traces of his past. That theory made so much more sense than believing that his kind and humble friend of nearly 2 decades could be even remotely involved in taking the life of his family. The couple had also hoped to protect their children from the traumatizing news. They would have preferred that Romand had died along with the rest of his family, so they could tell their children that their friends, Antoine and Caroline, had perished alongside their parents in the fire. But that wasn't possible. Reporters, photographers, and TV stations swarmed their community, interviewing everyone they could, including the children. So everyone knew all too well that Antoine, Caroline, and their mother had been murdered by their father, after which he set their house on fire. Many children began fearing that their fathers might do to them what Romand had done to his own children. And many had nightmares that their homes were on fire. The Ladmirals themselves had to move their children's beds into their own bedroom, as no one wanted to sleep alone anymore. For several evenings following the murders, friends gathered and speculated, compared notes, and theorized about Romand and everything related to the case. They tried to recall anything that they might have overlooked that should have raised their suspicion. The president of the school board recalled the phone call he'd made to the WHO. Luc himself recalled how just a few months prior to the murders, Florence shared how Romand had ranked 5th on his medical board exam. Luc was surprised that Romand had not mentioned that ranking at the time that it happened. He also reflected that some things that Romand had said about his career in the past didn't sound quite right, and he had considered calling the WHO back then to inquire about his role there. But then, he dismissed the idea as absurd. He wondered whether things would have ended differently if he'd made the call. His wife's response: "Perhaps he would have killed you as well." Romand was seen by a psychiatrist who diagnosed Romand with narcissistic personality disorder. French author Emmanuel Carrère, who would later go on to interview Romand and write a book about the case, noted that he felt that Romand wanted to be caught. He stated, "I think he felt trapped and that it would have been a great relief to him to be discovered. At each stage, the consequences became greater. At the beginning, it was a little lie that his wife might have asked for a divorce. Later, because of his dodgy financial dealings, he might have had a brief stint in prison. But nothing more than that. And it never happened. His luck was his terrible misfortune." Then, Corinne wanted her money. And someone from the school board called the WHO. And a WHO employee's wife asked Florence if she was going to the office Christmas party. The walls were closing in on Romand. And in the end, Carrer states, he thought it was preferable that his family should die rather than that they should suffer from the knowledge of the truth about him. Romand's trial for the murder of his wife, children, and parents began on June 25, 1996. And on July 6, Jean-Claude Romand was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 22 years. Romand was sent to Saint-Maur prison in central France to serve out his sentence. He is reported to have been a model prisoner, having done a stellar job of restoring audio archives for his first 16 years in prison. When not working that job, he obtained some internet technologies qualifications, studied Japanese, literature, meditation, philosophy, and more. Romand claims to have remorse for what he did and has become a religious man. Since his imprisonment, a book was written based on Romand's case, and subsequently, a film was created based off of the book. 2 more films were also created that were loosely based on the case. In February 2019, having served 26 years in prison, Romand was up for parole. His parole was denied, with the magistrates stating they doubted that his narcissistic and pathological disorders had improved. However, that decision was appealed and reversed. And Romand, aged 65 at the time, was released from prison in July of 2019. He was sent to live at Benedictine Abbey Monastery in Notre Dame de Font-Gambalt in central France. He was scheduled to stay there for 2 years, allowed to leave during the day, but required to return each night. He wears an electronic ankle bracelet that monitors his location. And he is barred from returning to the scene of any of his crimes or contacting anyone involved. A father at the monastery is reported as stating, "We want to give him the opportunity to place himself before God, his last judge on the gates of eternity." We'll leave it up to you in the comments to speculate on what Romand's eternity would or should consist of. The 2 years since his release has passed, and there have been no reports of Romand's life or whereabouts since then. We hope this video did justice to all the Romand family members whose lives were so tragically taken from them by this selfish killer. We're no medical experts, but 2 words come to mind when it comes to Jean-Claude Romand: pathological liar. So we looked it up. It means a chronic behavior in which the person habitually or compulsively lies. Interesting, that sounds pretty accurate. We obviously also see why he was diagnosed with a narcissistic disorder given, well, everything. So the question is, do you think he's still a threat to society given those tendencies? Is that something that can be treated and cured? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this one, please hit like for us and definitely hit subscribe so you never miss a single video.